Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lore You Should Know. I am Greg Tito, and I'm joined by...
Chris Perkins.
That's you.
It's me.
I know. It's so great to have you here. Today, on this segment where we dive into little bits of Dungeons & Dragons lore for use in your game, or just because it's really fun to know all this stuff, we're going to talk about Wildemount, a new addition to the D&D multiverse.
Indeed, yes. The world of Exandria. Welcome to the D&D multiverse.
We're really happy to have you here,
yes.
Matthew Mercer and all of the amazing folks who worked on this book.
Indeed, yeah. This is actually the first official published campaign setting designed for 5th edition.
That's really true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because with Ravnica and Acquisitions Incorporated, they were all,
they
in
were
the same
around,
vein, but they were around before.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only one that has been created actually in the entire era of 5th edition, because it was March 2015 that Critical Role debuted.
Yes.
Right? Which was after this. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like all that. All right, so in this one, we are going to talk about Gods of Wildemount, the deities that are doing all of the fun things. Mm-hmm. Are they similar to the Forgotten Realms gods of yore, in which they have direct influence on the events of Wildemount?
They don't
or
anymore.
Exandria? They don't anymore. All right, so kind of similar to FR in that regard.
Well, they have been very present in the distant past of Exandria. But now they're currently locked behind the Divine Gate, which is a self-imposed, well, for many of the gods, it's a self-imposed exile, in a way, from the world, so that they can no longer meddle or accidentally destroy as they once did. And there's, in the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount book, Matt goes in deep to explain how the gods ended up putting themselves and their betrayer god foes behind this divine gate.
Okay, so they are behind an actual, I guess, metaphysical gate.
Correct. Yeah, which was all born out of an event that was calamitous to the world, where the prime, what we call the prime deities, the ones who sort of define the core ethos of the pantheon, and the betrayer gods, the ones who went bad and started to corrupt mortals of the world and do all kinds of unseemly things to the creation that the gods had made together.
Which is a common trope in our myth as well as fantasy
exactly.
myth, right?
And in actual fact, we've seen these tropes come up before in Dungeons & Dragons, because to an extent, a lot of inspiration for the pantheon came from the Dawn War deities that were created for 4th edition. There was a sort of core pantheon that included such figures as Melora and Bahamut.
The Raven Queen.
The Raven Queen, exactly. And Matt kind of took that core pantheon and kind of switched a few things around, added a few things, sort of peeled off some of the gods into a betrayer gods category and keeping the core pantheon intact. But, I mean, just
we're going through the actual proofs of the book right now.
One of the final proofs of the book, pre-bound. We've even got a version of the cover that we see from the printers to make sure it's color correct. But anyway.
And I mentioned that it is inspired by old myth, because it brings to mind Tolkien with the Iluvatar, and then having the fallen Melkor. And then it's also, that's reminiscent of Satan falling from the heavens, right? And I love this, that we're exploring those same themes, but in a completely new and interesting way.
In the earliest form of Exandria, it was sort of this proto-world that the gods and the primordials were fighting for control over. Eventually, the gods seeded the world with their creations, these mortals, and then they made the mistake of giving mortals magic, and of course, things quickly go off the rails.
They always do that. They always give us too much.
They're helpful at first, and then things kind of go sideways. But the prime deities of the world, as it stands today, are Avandra, Bahamut, Corellon, Arathis, Ioun, Kord, Melora, Moradin, Pelor, Ray, the Raven Queen, and Sehanine.
Okay.
So the only new addition to that from sort of the 4th edition Dawn War pantheon is Ray, and that was inspired by one of the characters of the show, Tasha, Ashley Johnson's character, who needed sort of a particular deity to inspire toward.
And what is this Re the deity of?
Atonement.
Atonement.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's a new portfolio. For us.
Yeah. And it's a fine addition because none of the other gods really kind of fit that particular idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. All right, so then are they the ones that you just listed? Many D&D fans will be familiar with them.
Yes.
Are there significant differences between any of them and the ones that are portrayed here in Exandria?
Yes, they've all sort of got a slightly different skin. In fleshing them out for his campaign, Matt sort of came up with commandments that the followers of these gods follow. He also developed their sort of look and imagery a bit. So some of their symbols were modified. He found sort of new ways to express some of their core portfolio things. The commandments are really kind of interesting and fun from a hook point of view, because then if you're playing a worshiper of so-and-so, you really get a sense of what you're all about and what you should be focused on. Just to take example, the commandments of Avandra, for those who don't know, they, gods are, you can't really ascribe a gender to gods.
They're genderless.
They're kind of above gender in a way.
Yeah.
Avandra, their province is change, freedom, luck. The symbol is woman's profile embossed on a gold coin or pendant. And their commandments of Avandra are, luck favors the bold. Mm-hmm. So your fate is your own to grasp, and to do so is to have Avandra kind of behind you, watching your back. Another commandment is change is inevitable.
Oh, that's an important one.
The righteous can ensure that such change is for the better. And then finally, the other commandment of Avandra is you want to rise against tyranny. Fight for the freedom of yourself and others when you can, and inspire others to fight when they're able.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do the commandments have mechanical effects, or are these more like the bonds and flaws?
Yeah, they're like guideposts to you as a character to kind of know what your boundaries are ethically.
I like that, though, because specifically stating those out is really important for clerics and paladins, particularly because you can say as a dungeon master, you're not doing what this commandment says, so therefore you might have some consequences or give the choice to the player to make sure that they're following those commandments.
Absolutely, yes. And so Matt got to play with their depictions and these sort of elements, and also talk about things like holy days within the world of Exandria and within the continent of Wildemount, which is something which is really a good point. If you're a DM and you're trying to take something that we've created in the past but kind of make it your own, these are great creative design spaces to explore. So the Raven Queen's holy day is called the Night of Ascension, and some folks who follow Critical Role would know this.
Yes.
Celebrating her apotheosis. The actual date of her rise to divinity is unclear, but the Night of Ascension is celebrated on the 13th day of the 10th month. And what was once a night of cheery celebration of the dead in the Dwendalian Empire has become an occasion to burn effigies and decry the Kryn dynasty because of their kind of unnatural relationship to death. So there's a lot to unpack there, but it's...
Whose devotion to death that you just said there?
Sorry?
The last bit about the Kryn Empire, you're burning effigies because...
they've got a thing going on. There's a deity that I was going to get to later, but we might as well get to right now. And deity might be an odd word to ascribe to this entity or entities called the Luxon. And they're sort of represented by these beacons that are kind of a crux of season 2 of Critical Role.
Campaign 2.
But the Luxon are entities of pure sort of divine light. But what's cool about them is they enable their followers to live multiple lives. So you die, your soul gets drawn into the Luxon, and then is born in like a new baby somewhere in the world. So it's like this constant rebirth, and you retain much of the knowledge of what you were or your previous lives or aspects of your previous lives in this new form. So it is kind of more like an apotheosis than a reincarnation or a resurrection.
So that these souls will live multiple lives
Yes.
and have memories of multiple
Exactly,
lives.
and so they become quite ancient
Yeah.
as a result. And the Kryn dynasty is sort of the Kryn dynasty is largely made up of dark elves, and so you have these dark elves who have experienced this apotheosis, which is called consecution, multiple times, and have multiple lives to draw from. And of course, to the Raven Queen, the finality of death is a sacrosanct thing, and this is a way to circumvent that, and she doesn't like it.
And that's why the Dwendalian Empire is in opposition to Kryn.
Well, yes.
Or one of the many
One of the
reasons?
many reasons. The other
Yeah.
is geographic, and we'll get to that probably in a later podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Fascinating. The Raven Queen does seem to have taken a large amount of importance in this setting. Is that true?
Yes. Yes. I think because, for a number of reasons, death is kind of a core element of Dungeons and Dragons. Players face it almost every session.
Depends on who's the dungeon master, but yes.
Fair. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. If you're mine, every 5 minutes. If you're my player. And she's also a very striking figure, and has been represented a lot in art. And she was very compelling in the first season of Critical Role because you had a character who was directly tied to the Raven Queen, and so she became more important as a consequence. As happens in most D&D campaigns, certain gods tend to rise in prominence above the others by sheer fact that a player is connected to them.
Right.
The same was true last season, and I think a lot of people really liked the mystery surrounding her and the idea of here is a god of death who is, if not benign, at least not evil.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating take on, because so much of Dungeons & Dragons has been about, like, if you're a god of death, you're necromantic, you're evil, blah, blah, blah. And then here is this at least positive way of thinking about the finality of death.
Exactly. And things like undeath or aberrations in the minds of Raven Queen worshippers and things like that. So there's interesting conflict. You always have undead showing up in a campaign somewhere, and if you're a Raven Queen worshipper, you got an issue with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Raven Queen was a new addition for the 4th edition Pantheon, right?
That is correct, yes.
Were you involved in the...
Yes. There was here's a bit of interesting lore. So at the dawn of 4th edition, before we released any products, we had 2 committees put together, one whose focus was on rules and the other focus on world design and sort of what the cosmology should be. And I was part of the latter group with folks like James Wyatt and Rich Baker. And we sat down upon request to create, we were asked to create a pantheon that could sort of serve as the default pantheon. And in doing so, we didn't want one as big as some of the other pantheons that had been created for earlier worlds, like the Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk, which have dozens, if not hundreds, of deities in their pantheons. So we really wanted to narrow it down as much as we could. And we either picked gods who were representative of core concepts like creation or justice, if we felt they existed, and we tried to go outside just the human spectrum. So that's how we ended up with Moradin on the list, and Bahamut. Traditionally, they're worshipped by dwarves and dragons. But we were building a mythology where it didn't matter what the god was, its worshippers could be anybody. And as we were fleshing out the list, we realized there wasn't really a particularly compelling god of death who wasn't some just evil force. And James Wyatt was actually the one who concocted the Raven Queen.
Interesting.
Yes, to fill that hole and to create somebody who was a god of death who was mysterious but not evil.
And it was, fascinating for Matt Mercer, so that's why he brought it forth.
Yes.
And ended up, and then you're right.
Everybody loves ravens, right?
Yeah, no, right.
They're so weird.
And it was Liam O'Brien's character Vax, right? That was the one that was a devotee of the Raven Queen in campaign 1.
Yes.
How was that resolved for?
Didn't work out for him.
Yeah, I was just gonna say
actually, it may have worked out perfectly for him. I think. Actually,
I think the player, he was happy to see it go away. But
Vax is with who he should be.
That's fascinating. All right, so then how does the Raven Queen, other than how you mentioned, how does that pertain to campaign 2, and how the stories have been going on there?
Well, I mean, like I said, different players sort of maybe shifted Matt's focus on the gods, and I have no idea where season 2 is going, where the gods will take them, but there's
Other gods that have come to the forefront?
Yeah, there are others have like I said, Ray has come to the forefront and stuff like that. There are also I know there's allusions to some of the betrayer gods coming
Yeah, so
up.
let's talk about the betrayer gods. How do they fit into this cosmology?
So they are the betrayer gods are deities who strayed from the ideals sort of set down by the gods in the early conceptions of the world, and they embrace destructive chaos. And unlike the ones I mentioned earlier, these ones don't tend to work together very well. They pursue individual interests, and they're just evil. Different shade, like chaotic, neutral, lawful, whatever, but they're evil.
Yeah.
This lack of ability to cohere into an actual pantheon is sort of their fundamental weakness, and why the prime deities can sort of stay above them and do their best to try to prevent incursions by betrayer gods through the divine gate and so on and so forth.
So the betrayer gods are like Cobra, in that they're always
A little bit.
fighting.
Yeah. Or they're getting their worshippers, they're encouraging their worshippers to do terrible things.
Right.
And so they include such luminaries as Asmodeus, Grumpsh, Lolf, Tharizdun, Bane, Taurog, who was one of the Dawn War 4th edition deities, sort of this evil force of torture that lives underground. That's sort of come up in the campaign with the Eaters of the Worm and other kinds of creepy stuff that Matt has introduced. Zahir and Vecna, who appeared at the end of last season and whose presence lingers on.
Has Vecna ascended to being a
Yeah.
deity?
Yeah.
At this point?
Yeah. In Exandria, it is a full-on deity.
Interesting.
Yeah. And was in the 4th edition Dawn War Pantheon too, just to be clear.
Right, I do remember that. Yeah. Always nice to get an elevation.
Yeah. But I wonder what the commandments of Vecna are.
What are the commandments of Vecna?
So, as you know, Vecna, the whispered one, thou shalt not say his name, although we've said it multiple times already.
Yes.
But we're already screwed, right?
Also, Voldemort, just
yeah.
to make sure we're covering all of our bases.
Yeah. So his commandments are: learn all you can and keep hidden that which you know. Reveal what pieces you must, but never the whole. Express and cultivate the evil within yourself, and in doing so, recognize it in others and exploit them for your own benefit. And finally, seed the ruin of all who worship other deities until only those who kneel before Vecna remain.
Yeesh.
Yes.
What about Taurog? Since they made the one that's less familiar
yes,
with people.
the crawling king.
Crawling king.
Yes, he's this 3-armed worm-like thing that burrows through the Underdark, essentially, or the underworld, probably more properly.
Gross.
Although he is manifest in the world of Exandria in a number of ways, including this worm-like entity that spawns all sorts of badness.
Is that reminiscent of Caius and the Sons of Caius, or is
that is a fair question. So Taurog was created whole cloth for 4th edition, again to sort of fill a niche in the pantheon, a sort of elder evil, a horror of the depths kind of thing. So it was not spiritually bound to Caius in any way, shape, or form, but there's definitely sort of an overlap conceptually.
right?
But where Caius is more like the rotting corpse, the putrescence that inevitably follows death.
Yeah.
Taurog is more about shackled in the darkness, torture, imprisonment, and doom.
So less about undeath and more about just, hey, by the way, you're gonna not like
Yeah,
where you are
exactly.
right now.
You're going to have a miserable existence and enjoy it for eternity. So its commandments are: seek and exalt places where no light touches, revel in the pain you inflict on others, and relish the pain you suffer yourself as an offering to Taurog, and then imprison those who cannot resist you and drag all life into darkness.
Man,
He is not a happy dude.
yeah,
Not happy
something.
dude.
There's something really powerful about these commandments, I have to say, because you can read about how deities manifest and what their portfolios are all the time, but there's something about having it be this actual command in a commandment form that you really just gets at the heart of like how they're different from each other, but then how you can use it in your game.
Yeah. There is this sense in Wildemount that people know that the gods are sort of held at bay in their sort of self-imposed nature. And because of that distance, what has happened is there have naturally arisen powerful mortal creatures who have tried to stand in for gods on the world. And Matt calls them lesser idols. And they are like false idols. They're not true gods, but they are very, very powerful creatures or beings that can be fought and do have worshippers. And a lot of those are codified in this campaign setting as well. And they're all new. They're all born out of Matt's wonderfully twisted imagination.
That's pretty fantastic. So they're
yes.
like what we might have called lesser deities in the past,
Yes.
but they're here on the plane of the material.
Exactly. One of them who gets a lot of mention is Uk'otoa.
Uk'otoa.
And that name has popped up repeatedly in season 2. It is basically a Leviathan, the sea monster, that was worshipped by these people called the Kinau, who basically were taken with Uk'otoa because Uk'otoa destroyed their enemies. And so, oh, great Uk'otoa, we now kneel before you and don't eat us, please.
Now we're going to destroy a lot more people than just your enemies.
Yeah, exactly. In Uk'otoa's case, things have not gone well for it lately. It has been basically trapped under the ocean and is trying to break out, but can sort of telepathically or supernaturally reach out from beyond its confines. And there is a serious danger that it's for the DM to decide at what point this creature will resurface and become a menace to all the islands and coastlines of Wildemount. And then there are other ones. Let's see, what's one of my favorites? Let's talk about Quajoth.
Quajoth.
Yes, let's do that.
Let's do it.
The mystery, this is the worm thing I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The mystery of whether Quajoth is a creation or the direct progeny of Taurog is unknown, but the deranged gargantuan worm creature that scouted the Crawling King's advances in the Calamity was thought to have been slain in the ferocious final battles, leaving a sizable portion of its wounded body behind. A slimy fragment of Quajoth burrowed deep beneath the surface and slumbered in the cold earth under Eiselcross to recover and regrow. And just to jump ahead a little bit, there are these humans who live in the cold reaches of Eiselcross who found this worm entity in the depths of this cavern network and started to eat its flesh. Food being, relatively hard to get.
Yeah.
And
did that cause curses or
yeah, so what it does is when you eat Quajoth's flesh, Quajoth becomes inside of you and can basically talk and see through you. So you become this kind of weird puppet creature that Quajoth can use to kind of experience the world that it has left behind. And it doesn't exert its control over you all the time either. So you may be fully fine, and then you kind of black out for a while, and you suddenly realize you're in a different place and doing something different. You're like, what just happened?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
I do not like that.
Yeah. Isn't that just messed up?
Yeah, it is messed up because then
Yeah.
you can, as a dungeon master, you can use that very evilly.
Yes. And of course, I always imagine Matt cackling with glee when he writes sentences like, Quajoth's recovered body resembles a monstrous muscular worm of folded bulbous skin covered in tooth-like scales, its jagged mouth surrounded by a ring of pointed teeth with a thrice-forked tongue bearing its 3 ivory eyes. Like, oh. Okay. All right. That says all kinds of wrong.
I think you're the only person, Chris Perkins, who could read that with like an audible smile on your face as you're reading it.
Yeah. Players are going to hate this, and I
Yeah,
love
like,
that.
I love it. Oh my God, that's fantastic. All right, well, there's tons of detail on the deities in Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. One thing that I always like to ask as we're closing out this segment is how can dungeon masters take what's in this and apply it to their home games, or if you're going to set it in an Exandria campaign?
Well, I mean, and what Matt recommends is also what I recommend is as you take what you just plunder. You take it apart and keep what you want and jettison the rest. But the way I tend to work with campaign building is to first just focus on what you need. Like, you don't have to define an entire pantheon right out the gate, and you certainly don't have to tell the players what the entire pantheon is.
Yeah.
So if you need to change direction or if you want to insert something new, you can just kind of do that on the fly. So you can start off just focusing on the gods that are important to the players. If your player identifies that they want to worship a god of a particular type and you don't have that in your pantheon, you can just build one or reskin one of the ones that are here. A lot of them are so they're detailed in one sense, but they're also very broad conceptually. They have multiple hooks
Yeah.
to them, or their portfolio is more than just one thing. And so you can kind of build off of that and say, well, Avandra isn't exactly what I need. I'm going to go maybe create a new god of change and luck, or I might pull one from another world like Timora or something and use that instead. But I'll keep the commandments because I really like that. That's just something I can give to the players, and I don't have to rethink or rewrite that.
And in some ways, that's what Matt did with,
Yes.
with this setting. Is that
Exactly.
he took all the things that
Yes.
you guys had worked
Yeah.
on for
Yeah.
4th edition and built it, and then changed it and modified it for his own uses, and then focused on ones that
Yeah.
players were. I mean, exactly what you're describing. I think that's really
in my campaigns. I tend to think about the conflict that is brewing ahead in the campaign, and if I have a player who worships a god, I will often think, is there another god who will oppose that god, or whose worshippers will oppose that god? And then I'll just focus the campaign on those two gods. And I remember in some of my campaigns, I don't think my players even knew what the whole pantheon was at any given time, because we were so just focused on the gods to which they were concerned about.
Right.
And in no Forgotten Realms campaign have I ever felt the need to give players
here's the 25 gods that we're going to talk about
200
today.
Here are the
Yeah.
200 gods.
Well, right, yeah.
Of Faerun that you can mull over. It's just too much and wholly unnecessary. Yeah.
Holy. Huh.
Wholly.
Well done.
Thank you. Before we tune out, or actually, I'll save that for later.
Okay.
I got the thing for later. But
Yes, we've got lots of fun stuff to show on future Lore You Should Knows, where we'll dive into a little bit more behind Exandria and Wildemount in particular, and maybe even get some insight from the creator.
Absolutely.
Excellent. If people want to ask you about anything, how could they get in touch with you?
I am on Twitter at Chris Perkins DND.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining me and talking about this, and we'll be back with some more fun lore soon.
Yay!
Yay!